So, Jonathan, you've talked about your time with Andrew Yang, and obviously he was very important in terms of debate after debate raising UBI as a policy. Now, as the government is trying to respond to coronavirus, like that was the answer that was presented, at least in the front. In the back, they were giving a lot of money to corporations, stuff like that. But for helping people, it was effectively at least short-term UBI. Do you feel that had Andrew Yang decided to go on vacation instead of running for president, 2 years ago, would that have happened? Was he the linchpin in making UBI part of this response?
Well, certainly there's this saying and empirical reality that what seems politically impossible can only become inevitable in the times of crisis, where it's the ideas that are in the fore that are percolating to the surface that are even considered to be on the table in a time of crisis, in a time of depression and war, or in this case, pandemic. And so, against all odds, really, it just illustrates and vindicates fighting for principled ideas and beliefs and maintaining that conviction. Because to your point, who would have thought that from Mitt Romney to Justin Amash to Rashida to AOC to members of the Trump administration, all across the aisle in some form of another, folks would support some version of direct cash transfers to
Mm-hmm.
Americans.
And so right now we had already passed, as of when we're recording this, a little bit more money than even the monthly payment that Andrew Yang had been advocating for, but for a very limited time. Now politicians like Bernie Sanders are saying, no, it needs to be 2,000 and it does need to go forward until, we don't know exactly when. Do you feel like that is the right path, that the 1,000 is not necessarily intended to grapple with an economic catastrophe of this sort? Should it be something that we are looking to expand out, for the next 6 months, the next year? What form of UBI would you advocate for if you were holding the position today?
Yeah, certainly the proposals that suggest $1,000 as a floor for all adults and around $500 for all children, or $2,000 on a monthly basis for the duration of the crisis. These are steps in the right direction. And this is not enough as a stopgap. Certainly, even $1,200 as a one time payment on its own is not enough. And we will need to have multiple ways of stimulus that don't just put a fraction of the entire bill, the entire bailout, directly into people's hands. But what we'll see is that once folks start to get these checks, um, we will start to question it at a fundamental level. Well, where did this $2 trillion come from?
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible that actually the government can send and bail out its own people above multinational firms? And once we start questioning that fundamental possibility, it opens the gates to, as you said, greater and greater investment in people directly.
So, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is your gut feeling. Obviously, you worked with one of the men who did the most individually to raise. Obviously, UBI goes back a long way. People have been advocating it for a long time, but Andrew Yang was fundamental in getting it to be a household name, sort of like AOC with the Green New Deal. These are not necessarily new ideas, but they do need a leader, a spokesperson. Do you feel like you can't put the genie back in the bottle? That once people realize that this is possible and they start to see some of the positive benefits of it, that even once we're not thinking about coronavirus on a daily basis, that you will see more politicians pushing for it as sort of the de facto one component of the social safety net?
I think it is definitely harder to put the genie back in the bottle. But the one thing that we've seen is that there is nothing inevitable. There's no teleology about this. And the last time we saw unemployment projections hit 30, 32% was around the 1930s in Germany. And there is no teleology, nothing natural about history and the course of events. There are ideas, there are people, and there are people who act upon those ideas. So I agree with you that it makes it much more likely. It makes the barrier for political courage a lot lower, but we need to act upon it and defend it and to fight on all fronts at all times.
What other aspect of Andrew Yang's platform and what he talked about a lot was automation, and I'm curious that now we're in a situation where people are being forced to work from home, if that's even possible. Many people are losing their jobs. There's any number of different essential workers that are at an incredible amount of risk on a daily basis. Some of them would be, I think, very hard to replace, but I'm sure efforts are underway to replace those, who are working in, like supermarkets, food delivery, some things like that. And even once we get past coronavirus, there will be other pandemics potentially. Are you worried that this could help to accelerate that trend towards automation that people who are ideologically affiliated with you have been warning about?
That's unfortunately exactly right. And by the data, which is firms are accelerating, firms are investing at an even faster pace, not just in furloughs and in layoffs, but in automating systems and processes and entire sectors. And so, unfortunately, COVID-19 and this pandemic is only accelerating the underlying trends and underlying realities of an economy and a system that's pushing more and more and more people aside.
And Jonathan, where can people find out more about your platform, about your candidacy?
Absolutely. So it's on Herzog2020.com, or if you're on social media, Jonathan Herzog5 on Twitter, on Instagram, and Facebook, and all the above.
Awesome, Jonathan. Well, thank you once again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.